Hello, everyone. Tonight we are descending into a cave so ancient even the darkness feels prehistoric. The air smells of wet stone and forgotten time. Your foot lands softly on a bed of dust, unbothered for millions of years until now. Just beyond the faint glow of your torch, something shifts, not something alive, not anymore. But it was fast, it was feathered, and it was very good at not being seen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle toward the cave mouth where wind curls like a whisper that forgot the words. The stone is jagged but dry. No signs of water here, not anymore. The mouth of the cave gapes not in a scream, but in that stunned silence of something that once saw too much. You duck low, following claw marks, deep, narrow, impossibly precise, not gouges made by something thrashing. These are paths. This thing moved with purpose. Your hand brushes a depression in the rock. It's shaped like a paw print, but not one you'd recognize. Three curved toes, slender but strong. Not flat-footed like a bear, not padded like a lion. There's an elegance to the structure, something bird-like. Except no bird leaves gouges this deep into stone. And then you see the second print, then the third, all arranged in a neat little zigzag. This creature didn't drag its tail like a dinosaur out of a children's book, it balanced like a dancer, or a murderer. The ancient people who stumbled across these caves had no name for it. But they feared it. You would have too. It didn't need to roar. It didn't even need to be seen. It simply waited until you weren't sure you were alone. Archaeologists call this area one of the richest fossil sites for feathered raptors ever found. But there's something odd about the pattern. Most prehistoric predators kept to the open plains where they could chase sprint pounce in full sunlight. This one, whatever it was, chose darkness. It didn't just tolerate caves, it lived in them. And caves, as it turns out, are very good at keeping secrets. You inch forward and feel the temperature shift. The cave exhales through the back of your neck. Something brushes past your arm. A strand of web. No too thick. It's a downy feather still clinging to a small ridge in the stone, fragile as dust. You pluck it gently. Not fossilized, this one's new. Dropped by a bird maybe a century ago, nesting in the mouth. But still, it feels like a sign. The cave walls here are mottled, not painted. This isn't a human canvas, but stained in irregular blotches. Some have interpreted them as claw-sharpening marks, others as mold. But under the beam of your light, they take on a new shape. Repeating arcs, maybe tail swipes, maybe wings. Not flying wings. Let's not get too excited, but balanced structures. Elbows and feathers used for maneuvering in tight quarters. You don't need to soar to be terrifying. In fact, it's safer if you don't. There's an odd fact you might like: the deepest parts of cave systems often hold the most oxygen-depleted air but still preserve organic material better than anywhere on the surface. It's why we find fossils of things that never should have been preserved: skin imprints, whiskers, delicate bone filaments. In one particular cave system somewhere in what is now inland China, researchers unearthed not just bone, but an entire silhouette of feathers laid out like a crime scene. Not scattered, arranged. And now you're in the entrance to something like that. The cave floor opens up into a chamber barely high enough to stand in. Your boots crunch over something. You freeze. Not stone. It's hollow. You kneel. It's a small skull. Rodent, maybe. You lift it gently. The back of it has been pierced by something very narrow. Not a bite, a stab. You hear a small click behind you. Not real, just your brain trying to recreate the sound of something gone. You spin around anyway. The space is still. Some paleontologists theorize this cave once acted as a kill corridor. Prey would be chased or lured inward by scent or vibration until they reached this tight bottleneck chamber. No escape. One strike to the back of the skull, then the raptor could retreat and dine at leisure. Others argue the marks are territorial, that several of these feathered predators shared the same roost, each one defending its own chamber like an apartment complex from hell. Historians still debate whether these raptors ever even left the caves, or whether they evolved to spend their entire life cycle inside hatching, hunting, and dying without ever seeing daylight. One research team proposed they might have been blind by maturity trading vision for touch and scent. Another team called that romantic nonsense. The debate continues probably in some very well-lit faculty lounge far above ground. But you're still down here at the threshold of where light fails. The feathers left behind don't rustle, they whisper. And when you finally reach the edge of the chamber just before it slopes into full darkness, you see something that makes your stomach go cold. A trackway, hundreds of tiny prints all moving in one direction, and one much larger set of prints facing them. You step sideways, trying not to disturb the tracks, though honestly, that's like trying not to breathe on fogged glass. The prints are etched in a layer of ancient mineral dust, fine as powdered bone. You crouch low and squint at them. The larger ones are spaced wide, each three-toed imprint, ending in curved gouges that once belonged to claws. They follow no hurried pattern. Just a patient, deliberate series of steps like a pianist counting time between each note. And the smaller ones, they swarm forward dozens at least. Little quadruped scuttlers, possibly early mammals, possibly something worse. But they all run in the same direction into the darkness. You realize belatedly that they weren't chasing something. They were running away. And the raptor, because at this point, let's admit what it was waiting. You move deeper into the cave. It smells like rust and lime. The air thickens not with dust but with memory. It's a scent your lungs don't quite know how to categorize. You try to imagine the thing that lived here, fast, feathered, about the size of a very angry dog, and too light to leave deep impressions, but just heavy enough to let you know it meant business. There are no drag marks, no tail skids, no belly smears. This predator walked tall and tidy, probably with its arms tucked close to its ribs and its head angled forward like a spear point. You know the usual nightmare shape. One foot brushes a ridge in the stone, and your light glints off something oddly smooth. You kneel and run a fingertip along the curve of a shallow groove, then another. A whole patch of the cave floor has been worn slick like someone polishing it with time. These aren't predator marks. These are the marks of something fleeing. A clawed foot scrambling and sliding in panic again and again right before the kill. You begin to notice the absence of certain things. No bones left lying around, no mess. Whatever hunted here, it cleaned up. That's not normal for prehistoric predators. Most of them were messy eaters. Crunch, swallow, drop the rest. This one didn't. Or maybe it just ate everything, including the bones. Some theorize that's how it got away with so much. That it left behind no evidence, not by accident, but by instinct. A kind of ghost of evolution, hunting in a space where sound doesn't travel far and light doesn't travel at all. Odd fact, there's a modern-day bird called the oil bird that lives its entire life in dark caves and hunts at night using echolocation. Yes, a bird that echolocates. It's about the size of a pigeon, sounds like a squeaky door hinge, and looks like a half-plucked mistake. And yet it thrives. Makes you wonder how much of that strange lineage goes back farther than we think. Maybe even to something that wasn't quite bird, wasn't quite dinosaur, and definitely wasn't blind. You lean against a wall and steady your breath. The stone here curves outward, bulging like the inside of a rib cage. You shine your light higher and see something that freezes you. Claw marks, but not gouged down the wall. Upward. They start low and then leap 12 feet in a single bound each, barely pressing into the stone, but just enough to catch the edge. You trace their path like a heartbeat graph. The raptor didn't just walk, it climbed. Suddenly, the narrow footpaths make more sense. This predator didn't need wide-open plains. It turned walls into runways, ceilings into ambush platforms. And if the prey tried to escape back toward the entrance, well, that's where the gouges ended, and the hunt began. You find another feather. This one's fossilized, caught between two layers of sediment like a leaf pressed in a forgotten book. It's downy, not stiff like a flight feather, more for insulation or silence. That's the first proper scientific clue this creature didn't fly. Not even close. Its feathers were too soft, too shapeless. But that softness was the point. It moved without a whisper. You've seen owls fly right, practically silent thanks to special feather barbs. Now imagine that stealth except underground and on foot, and with claws sharp enough to slice open a coconut in one swipe. No wonder early mammals were nervous wrecks. You step into a hollow alcove where the ceiling dips again just above head height. The air's cooler here, and your torch flickers. Not due to wind, just nerves. You crouch and aim your light at the corner where bones once might have gathered. Instead, you find the marks. 3 lines, deep, parallel, almost like a tally, except not repeated, just once, and next to them a faint crescent. A claw signature maybe, or the result of a foot pressed in place for a long, long time. Historians still debate whether this spot was a resting place, a hunting perch, or a kind of shrine. Some claim the pattern of markings throughout the cave forms a map guiding the predator towards the best acoustic angles for hunting. Sound doesn't behave normally underground. It bends echoes, betrays direction. If you knew how to use that, you could strike before your prey even realized where the danger came from. And that's what this raptor did. It didn't rely on brute force. It choreographed its kills like a musician picking just the right note. You stand again slowly. The wall beside you is dry but not smooth. You run your hand along it and feel the faintest curve like a ripple frozen in stone. The cave has held its shape for millions of years, and yet somehow it still feels like it's waiting for another visitor, for another echo. Behind you, something clicks again. You turn, but of course nothing's there. Your light begins to dull, not because the battery's low, but because the cave walls are closing in, narrowing into a crawl space barely wide enough for your shoulders. You consider turning back. Then you spot something just past the pinch point, a shimmer, not of light but of texture. You drop to your knees and worm forward, stones scraping your jacket heart, thumping like you're the one being hunted. When you emerge, the chamber opens again. Not large, more like a forgotten throat of the earth, but enough to stand. The walls here are strange, flaky, not just weathered, but peeled. And right in the center, like an offering, lie feathers. Dozens of them. Some fossilized, others imprinted in a slab of claystone so perfectly preserved you can count the barbs. Most are short, dense, and mottled. A few are longer, maybe ornamental. You pick one up with gloved fingers. It's hollow, brittle, but still curved like a crescent moon. Not for flying, for balancing. Maybe for show. There's a small ridge at its base, evidence of a blood quill, a sign this feather was actively growing when the raptor lost it. Maybe in a scuffle, or a molt, or something worse. And now comes the odd part. One of the feathers has melted into the clay with such precision that the individual filaments are still visible, each one pressed like fine hair. But the angle's wrong. It's not lying flat as if it fell gently. It's driven in, like it landed hard. Which means whatever dropped it crashed. The idea of a predator losing its footing might feel reassuring. But consider this, caves are already dangerous. Add a creature evolved to hunt inside them, and you've got one adapted not only to move in the dark, but to fall in the dark and land without dying. That's a level of design even nature doesn't hand out lightly. You remember the fossils found in Liaoning, China, where impressions of Microraptor and its cousins revealed iridescent feathers black with hues of blue and green under certain lighting. Some archaeologists believe those tones helped with mating. Others say it was camouflage, but in a cave color is meaningless, which means the feathers served another purpose. Warmth, maybe? Silence, definitely, but also feeling. Birds today have something called phyloplumes, tiny, hair-like feathers that detect shifts in airflow. If these raptors had them, it means they could sense movement without seeing. You think of bats, but on legs. Sensitive to drafts, to the tremble of tiny wings, to the breath of a rodent tucked under a rock. Predators that didn't just stalk you, they felt you coming. That's your historical fact for the night. Prehistoric feathers weren't just about flight, they were multi-tools. Thermoregulation, mating display, communication, and sometimes hunting gear. The air shifts again, not from behind, below. You shine your light at your feet and notice a fissure in the floor, narrow but long. Something once slipped down there. A tail, maybe? You crouch and shine the beam into the crack. Nothing reflects. But the stone smells strange here, tangier, like old iron and wet moss. You reach out and feel the walls still flaking, still covered in feather traces. You realize now that this isn't just a chamber, it's a molt site. Birds do it seasonally. So did dinosaurs in their own ways. Feathers wear down, fray, get replaced. And if a creature lived its whole life in a cave shedding its old coat, the feathers would accumulate. Not scattered, but deposited, layered. The feather piles weren't just discarded, they were placed. Historians still debate whether this behavior was instinctive or ritualistic. Was the raptor making a nest marking territory? Or just scratching an itch against the rock and leaving behind what it didn't need? You feel a sneeze coming on. Too much dust. You turn and look for cleaner air. And that's when you spot it. A skull, tucked against the wall, half covered in collapsed sediment. You brush it gently. It's small, fox-sized, but unmistakably avian in its curves. Except it has teeth, not sharp like a snake's, but needle-like, recurved, made to grab and not let go. And the eye sockets, huge, larger than they should be for the size of the skull. There's no way this animal relied on anything but sight, which is funny considering it lived in a cave. Either it was a visitor, or it saw in the dark better than you could ever dream. You lift it carefully. The back of the skull is intact, but the base shows signs of fracture, maybe from a fall, maybe from something larger clamping down on it. Either way, it wasn't the top of the food chain. That roll belonged to something else. You stand again. Try not to shake the dust from your jacket. It'll just settle again. The feather chamber closes behind you as you move into another corridor, one barely wide enough for your shoulders. Every step crunches faintly now, not on stone, but on old fragments. Tiny bone shards. Bits of egg. Tiny vertebrae. You don't stop to check. Another odd fact: scientists found evidence of feather pigmentation in fossils over 100 million years old, meaning coloration and patterning go back far earlier than birds themselves. You think of that now as your light passes over the wall and reveals something unexpected: pigment stains. Faint, purplish, almost iridescent, like ink that forgot it was supposed to dry. You follow it with your beam and see it arc upward like a splash frozen midair. Something died here in motion, and not just any death. This was fast, violent, a pounce or a fall. One moment of chaos etched forever in chemistry. You whisper aloud just to break the silence, and your voice comes back wrong. Not echoed, muffled, like something in the cave doesn't want to give it back. Maybe that's the scariest part of all. Not that this raptor was real, but that it was never alone. You shift your weight quietly now, as though the memory of the thing that hunted here might still be listening. The floor is slick with mineral sheen, but your eyes are drawn upward because now the ceiling is gone, or rather melted open. A vertical shaft rises like a throat to somewhere you can't see. There are claw marks running up its sides, and here's the strange part. Not random scrapes, but symmetrical pairs evenly spaced. like rungs on a ladder. Whatever lived here didn't just climb, it ascended. You shine your light up the shaft, the beam dies in shadow. But in the half-second before it fades, you catch the edge of something, a skull. No, not one. 3. Wedged into a ledge arranged in a triangle. All small, all rodent-like, and all facing inward. You feel your stomach dip. That's not a coincidence, that's a pattern. Historians still debate whether the feathered cave raptor had social rituals or if it was simply another loner killer. But sights like this carefully arranged bones, clusters of feathers repeated, scratch markings suggest something more complicated. Some even argue it had a sense of aesthetics, that it decorated its space. There's something deeply wrong about that. A predator with taste. You back away from the shaft and into a side tunnel narrower than the last. The air changes again, warmer somehow. The walls here are different, smoother, more polished. Not by erosion, but by touch. You run your hand along the stone and feel it. A dip, a dip, a dip. Like fingertips pressing in sequence, but too wide for human hands. These are toe pads. The raptor walked here again and again, pacing. You follow the rhythm, and it starts to feel like a dance. A long looping circle through the chamber, each step perfectly placed to avoid noise. Some paleontologists call this tread behavior. Animals today do it too: wolves, cats, even some birds. A ritual walk to scent mark or soothe nerves, so maybe this raptor feathers muffling each step was nervous. Or maybe it was preparing for something. You find a divot in the center of the chamber ringed with stone. Not natural stone, but stacked pieces like someone or something tried to build a nest. The center is filled with debris. Not leaves, not moss. Feathers, all from the same creature. You crouch and lift a cluster of them. Most are broken. A few are pristine. The pristine ones are slicker, more structured. A different kind of feather. For display, for mating. Some are tinged faintly at the tip. Dark green, almost oily. Odd fact of the day. Iridescence in feathers doesn't come from pigment, but from microscopic structure. Tiny ridges that bend light like a prism. It's the same reason peacock feathers shimmer. So if this predator had iridescent display feathers, it wasn't trying to hide. It was trying to be seen. Now comes the question that has scientists quietly tearing each other apart over conference snacks. Who was supposed to see it? There's no light here. No sunlight to sparkle on feathers. No moonlight to catch a display plume mid-twirl. So was the glow imagined a lure? Or maybe something else entirely? Here's the wild theory: bioluminescence. Some researchers propose that this raptor, or perhaps its display feathers, could emit a faint glow. Not bright, just enough to shimmer in the dark, like a lure on a deep-sea fish, or the bioluminescent fungi that light up modern caves. A little flash of green, a flicker of blue, maybe just enough to hypnotize. Historians still debate whether this is wishful thinking or plausible adaptation. But you can't stop picturing it: a predator lurking in pitch black, twitching a glowing tail tuft like a fishing line, luring in wide-eyed mice too curious for their own good. And then snap. You step back from the nest, unsure if you feel reverence or revulsion. Maybe both. There's another passage leading out from the chamber, and here the walls tighten again. You're walking sideways now, crab-like, scraping your boots against edges that feel too intentional. There's a low hum in the air, not sound, pressure, like a cave humming to itself. You slow your breathing, not wanting to disturb it. Then another find. A fossil, fully intact, embedded in the wall at shoulder height, mid-pounce. A feathered raptor, jaws agape, one claw extended in eternal attack. You stare. Its body is sleek, narrow-chested arms, held in that familiar bird-like crook. Feathers line its back and forelimbs like the mantling of a hawk. The tail is long, feathery, and slightly curved, possibly used for balance. And the eyes. Once enormous, now hollow sockets rimmed with fossilized impressions. You can still feel them. You whisper, "What were you chasing?" And then you see it. Just below the fossilized raptor, another skeleton. Smaller, curled tight like a sleeping dog. But the back of its skull is crushed. The attack was successful, but something happened next. A rockfall, maybe. A tremor. The cave itself collapsed mid-hunt, sealing them together forever. It's one of the few moments in paleontology where you don't have to guess. No, we theorize, no, it's possible. Just pure fossilized storytelling. The hunter and the hunted caught in the act. You sit down suddenly, tired. The cave presses close again. Not threatening, just watching. And you wonder, what did it sound like in the instant before those two died? Did the raptor click its tongue, hiss softly, thrum its tail against the stone? Did it hear its prey whimper? Did it care? Or was it silent, feathered, and flawless, acting on instinct so old it couldn't be questioned? The answer is sealed in stone, but you still feel it, right behind your ribs. You keep walking because turning back would mean admitting you're unsettled, and anyway, the way behind you looks different now. Smaller, hungrier. So forward it is. This tunnel breathes. Not like air moving, but like presence. The walls here are closer together, ribbed with ancient mineral veins that glitter faintly under your light. But the footprints are back. The three-toed prints, deep but quiet, dot the floor in a tight zigzag. No tail drag, no belly smears, just those same deliberate dancing steps. And now, the real question starts to itch at the base of your skull. Why did this thing hunt in the dark at all? It could have gone outside. It had legs, lungs, feathers. It could have run free across the ferns like every other respectable killer of its time. But it didn't. It came here, voluntarily. So you ask yourself, what did it find down here that was better than sunlight? You reach a wide chamber. Wider than any so far. The ceiling vanishes into a craggy dome. A few stalactites hang like the teeth of something too old to chew anymore. And just past the center, there's a mound. At first, you think it's just stone. Then you see the bones. Small, light, mammalian. Thousands of them, layered like pine needles. The remains of something that bred in colonies, maybe. Or was raised here. You take a careful step and the crunch echoes like a gunshot. You freeze. Nothing stirs. But the silence tenses like it's waiting. The raptor. If it was smart, and we're starting to admit it was very smart, didn't pick this place for the ambiance. It came here because prey was abundant. Insects, bats, tiny mammals. Some researchers even proposed that these caves acted like natural traps. Prey wandered in for warmth or safety, then got picked off one by one. You shine your light toward the ceiling and spot more impressions. Bat-like wings, rodent claw marks. The narrow scratches of something trying to climb, but failing. Above them, higher on the wall, you see a vertical pattern of punctures. 3 in a row, about the spacing of a raptor's foot. It hunted from the ceiling, clinging upside down. You take a breath because that's a fact no one warned you about. Some species, like modern woodpeckers and certain climbing birds, have zygodactyl feet, 2 toes forward, 2 backward, for perching in impossible places. Fossil evidence suggests that this feathered predator had a similar foot structure. Not to grip branches, to cling to stone. Odd fact. One feathered raptor fossil was found with a fused tail vertebra, like modern birds have today, suggesting it used its tail not just for balance but as a counterweight, like a tightrope walker, which explains how it could crouch on a rock ceiling in utter silence, waiting for movement below. You step forward again more carefully now. There's a low tunnel on the far side, its floor packed with guano layers, long fossilized. Bat fossils hang above in delicate clusters, their wing bones thin as paper. You shine your light between the stone curtains. There's a different kind of mark here. Not prints, not gouges, but pits. Shallow, regular depressions in the floor. You touch one. It's warm. Not warm like heat. Warm like resonance. Your hand vibrates slightly. you pull it away fast. Some geologists think caves like this act as resonant chambers. Sounds bounce weirdly. The frequency of your voice might hum for minutes after you stop speaking. So what if the raptor used that not just for navigation? For hunting. Historians still debate whether it hunted actively or set ambushes using acoustic cues. Some theories suggest it could mimic sounds, clicks, squeaks, tiny footfalls to lure prey closer, like a one-creature sound trap. It may even have used its feathers for this purpose. You've probably never thought about feather acoustics, but birds today can ruffle in patterns that make whispering sounds. Amplify that in a cave. You've got an invisible mobile predator whispering you closer without you realizing it. That's the horror. Not the teeth, not the claws, the quiet. You hear a drip, then another. But it's not from water. It's rhythmic, like breath. You hold your own, but it keeps going. Somewhere in this cave, stone has remembered breathing. You step through the low arch and into a corridor filled with crystal formations. The walls glitter faintly. You sweep your beam across one cluster and nearly drop the light. Eyes carved into the rock. Or maybe scratched. Dozens of ovals with pupils, all staring outward, all different sizes. Some big as dinner plates, some barely bigger than coins. Were they decorative, territorial, warnings? No one knows. Archaeologists argue over their age. Some say they're weathering patterns. Others say early humans carved them in reverence or in fear, but they match the fossil skulls too well to dismiss. These were raptor eyes. Someone or something wanted to remember them. You feel watched, even though you're utterly alone. Or so you keep telling yourself. You pass through the corridor quickly, following the prints again. Now they're joined by drag marks, but small ones. Like something was being carried, not held. Perhaps the raptor caught a meal and brought it back. Perhaps it was feeding young. You reach another chamber, low, cramped, more intimate. And there it is, a fossil nest, ringed in stones, feather-lined. And beside it, 3 eggs, cracked, hollow, empty. Whatever lived here didn't just kill, it raised. You crouch low before the fossil nest, feeling as though you've stumbled into a sacred site. Not human sacred. Something older. Stranger. The eggs, still nestled in their cradled ring of stones, are pale and fractured like ancient porcelain. You resist the urge to touch them. They look soft somehow, still breakable. Even after all these years, you scan the ring and notice something odd. Around the edges of the nest, tiny bones lie scattered. Not just prey leftovers, but vertebrae so small they must have belonged to hatchlings. Several are whole, curled into fetal spirals. Others are partially crushed. The raptor didn't just lay its eggs here, it raised its young. That means food, warmth, protection. You shift your light toward the walls, and sure enough, they're worn smooth in some areas, as if something had rubbed against them repeatedly, flank wingtail. Not just one adult either. Possibly a pair, or more. That's when the realization creeps in like a draft under the door. This wasn't a solo predator. It might have hunted alone, yes, but here in the pitch-black calm of these inner caves, it wasn't just survival. It was family. Paleontologists studying similar fossil sites have proposed this shocking hypothesis. Some species of feathered raptors may have practiced cooperative rearing. Not exactly nurturing by today's standards, but better than eat the kids who don't run fast enough. If that's true, then these caves were more than hunting grounds. They were nurseries. And here's your offbeat fact of the night. Modern megapodes, a group of birds native to Australasia, bury their eggs in mounds of decaying vegetation and then monitor the temperature obsessively by sticking their beaks into the pile. Nature loves a multitasker. So maybe your cave raptor, let's just keep calling it that, wasn't just a killer. Maybe it was also a kind of twisted gardener, using geothermal warmth or composted prey remains to keep its eggs just the right temperature. You stand again, careful not to disturb anything. The ceiling here is lower and there's condensation on the stone. Your breath fogs slightly. It's warmer in this pocket than elsewhere, protected, almost cozy. Then you see it. A set of tiny claw marks leading away from the nest. Small feet, light steps, not chaotic, learning. They scuttle in tight loops across the chamber, bumping into walls, stopping, starting again. One pattern veers sharply to the left before tumbling into a slump of stone. The fossil of a youngling, no larger than a pigeon, lies embedded sideways, still mid-step. Its legs are gangly, feathers sparse, head oversized. You recognize it immediately, a juvenile. And now things get real. Because if these creatures raised their young in caves, then the darkness wasn't just tolerated, it was home. You remember a theory buried in a paper from a few years back? Not well received, probably laughed off over paleontology conference wine. But it's stuck in your brain now that certain raptor species, especially those from cold, volatile regions, evolved underground social structures. That they stayed in the dark for protection and to raise broods without interference from larger surface predators. Here's where things twist. A theory exists that this raptor species could detect prey not just through smell or sight, but through vibration. You think about the layout now. Tight corridors, smooth stone, echoing chambers. It wasn't just about hunting, it was about education. The juveniles wandering in circles, learning the subtle shifts in air, the bounce of a sound against stalactites, the weight of a moth wing in motion. Their early lessons wouldn't have been running or climbing. They were learning to listen. One researcher went so far as to claim the claw scratches in the walls were a kind of training tool, a prehistoric sensory gymnasium. Scrape the claw. Feel the echo. Learn what it means. Historians still debate whether these marks were deliberate communication or simple idle behavior, but there's a rhythmic quality to them. A tapping, a clicking. Could be nonsense. Or it could be the first steps in developing something language adjacent. You pass your beam over a wall covered in these marks. They start high adult height and descend into lower sets, progressively clumsier, wider spacing, juvenile attempts. Some scholars call this runt writing. I call it the world's oldest homework. The cave doesn't just speak, it remembers. You sit down on a rock and let the quiet surround you. Somewhere above your head, condensation drips in rhythmic pulses. Behind you, the juvenile fossil's hollow sockets stare into the stone forever. You wonder how many generations passed through this chamber. How many young learn to balance on 3 curved toes, to leap in silence, to wait in total darkness for the vibration of a mistake? How many little ones didn't make it? The floor tells part of the story. There are scratches on scratches, some so faint they're barely indentations, others deep and panicked. One long furrow curves erratically, then disappears under a rockfall. Maybe it was a fight, or a game, or a lesson gone wrong. The cave doesn't say. Another oddity presents itself. In a crevice near the back wall, you spot an accumulation of insect exoskeletons, mostly beetle-like. Modern, but their location matches where prey would have gathered thousands of years ago. The descendants of prey still come here. And you're standing where a hunter once stood. You let that settle. Then something brushes your ankle. You jump, light flailing wildly across the stone. Nothing's there, but in the hush that follows, you swear you hear it. A faint, dry click, like claws, tapping, just once. You don't move right away. You just stand there, ankle tingling, spine stiff, listening so hard your ears hurt. But no second click comes, only silence, which in this cave feels less like an absence of sound and more like a presence of waiting. When you finally breathe again, it's slow, controlled. You tell yourself it was just a pebble or a beetle shell falling from a ledge. Totally normal. Happens all the time in ancient predator nurseries. The tunnel out of the nesting chamber branches into 2 paths. The one on the right dips down, and something in you, call it gut, call it ancient mammalian anxiety, knows the raptor would have taken that route. So you go left. This passage isn't cleaner exactly, but it feels less used. The footprints are older, less distinct, dustier, still three-toed, still clawed, but smaller and worn by time. You shine your light along the floor, watching for prints, and notice something unusual. There are no wall scratches, just a broad smear along the right side, like something rubbed against it repeatedly, not sharp enough to scratch, but firm enough to leave a pattern. And suddenly you remember the snout. Raptors like this, especially cave-dwelling ones, weren't sight hunters alone. They likely evolved long, narrow snouts packed with sensory organs, like a mix between a crocodile and a bloodhound. And here's your historical fact of the night: modern birds, especially kiwis and shorebirds, have nostrils located at the tips of their beaks. Not for smelling better, but for smelling first. This feathered predator with its elegant nose may have had the same adaptation, able to detect prey long before it was visible. Maybe even through scent trails layered in damp cave air. The smear on the wall, a scent track, used repeatedly. Refreshed daily, a kind of prehistoric patrol route. You keep walking, trailing your fingers along the edge. It's smoother than expected, polished even. That's when you remember how dogs will rub against trees, not just to scratch, but to leave scent. You're walking through something's personal hallway. Then you smell it. Faint, musty, like wet feathers and turned earth. Not bad exactly, but undeniably organic. And recent. You hold your breath again and step forward. The tunnel opens into a tiny chamber barely wider than a closet. The walls here are crowded with exoskeleton fragments. Beetles, moths, wing cases that glitter like flakes of old paint. But more than that sense. Sharp resinous odors. Fungal sweetness. The smell of decomposition, but clean, almost ritualistic, like rot done on purpose. You drop to a crouch. There's a circular depression in the stone here about the size of a pizza pan, shallow, lined with crumbling beetle parts, and in the center a fossilized jawbone. Small, sharp, rodent most likely, but arranged, so it's facing upward. Not scattered, not random. You've entered a scent larder. Researchers still debate whether some species of feathered raptors use their food not just for sustenance but for signal. A kind of aromatic map of the cave. One theory proposes that prey remains were placed deliberately to draw other prey, or even to teach juveniles where hunting zones began and ended. An old, unsettling term for it is scenting the shrine. Here's your odd fact: turkey vultures can smell dead meat from miles away using a compound called ethyl mercaptan, the same chemical added to natural gas so humans can detect leaks. Nature's nose knows what it likes. So what if this predator could do something similar? What if it used scent not only to find its prey, but to trap it? You feel your own nose tingle. Not from rot, from intention. This little room wasn't an accident. It was bait. You retreat from the chamber and head deeper. The tunnel curves again, dipping downward. You're deep now. Really deep. No sound from the surface reaches this far. No breeze. Just the sound of your boots and your breath and the occasional drip that's beginning to sound like punctuation. Another corridor branches off, this one shorter. At the end, a wide, flat slab. Atop it, arranged in an unmistakable line, are fossilized snails. Not crushed. Whole. Just there. You blink. Snails. Historians don't even pretend to understand this part. Some think it was coincidence. Others say it's the only evidence we have of non-lethal collection behavior. That these predators, particularly older juveniles, might have brought toys back to the nest. Carried objects not for eating, but for stimulation. And maybe, just maybe, for learning. What makes a raptor smarter? You reach a narrow ledge overlooking a wider chamber below. You crouch to peer down. This one's big, bigger than anything you've seen yet. And down there in the center, dozens of claw marks, all different sizes, crossed, overlapped, even spiraling in places. It's like someone used the floor as a chalkboard for movement, a practice pit. Paleontologists studying similar formations have posited that these communal scratch zones acted like classrooms. Young raptors would imitate the motions of their elders, pouncing, slashing, balancing. No words, just movement. Historians still debate whether this is a form of instinctual mimicry or true cultural transmission. Either way, it means this: the raptors didn't just hunt, they taught. You back away from the ledge slowly. Something about this cave has shifted in your mind. This isn't a lair, it's a school. And you're walking through a memory of monsters who weren't monsters at all. They were students. You slide down into the practice pit because at this point, what else can you do? The floor is dusted with layers of old mineral sediment, and yet it feels somehow used. Like even now in the stillness, it might host another lesson. You shuffle carefully, avoiding the deep grooves where claws once scored the stone like signature flourishes on a chalkboard. You realize something strange: some of the scratch patterns overlap in deliberate repetition. The same motions again and again, not just random scuffs, but deliberate arcs, like a choreography. You can almost see it: a half-grown raptor feathers fluffed in frustration, lunging at shadows, trying to perfect the rhythm its parent demonstrated hours earlier. One arc dips, then slashes upward with a sudden twist impossibly elegant. This wasn't just practice, it was performance. You remember a recent paper, barely peer-reviewed, more of a speculative itch that suggested certain feathered theropods may have incorporated display movements into their hunting technique. Not to show off, but to confuse. Flash a plume here, pivot, there strike, while the prey's eyes follow the wrong angle. It sounds silly until you see these claw marks. This predator didn't just train its body, it trained its timing, and its feathers helped. Now that you're looking closer, you see small flecks embedded in the sediment. Not bones, not rock, feather shafts. Fossilized, flattened, but still discernible by their ridged texture. You pick one up. It's short, soft, like a quill that never quite grew up. You guess this area must have hosted juveniles. But it's the pattern that freezes you, because all around the outer edge of the pit are tiny indentations. Parallel tracks. Light, uneven, not raptor prints, prey prints. You get it now. This wasn't just a training ground. It was a live fire course. The elders didn't just teach their young how to move, they brought in live snacks and let them loose, supervised by the elder hunter. The juveniles would have to stalk, corner, and strike in the dark in silence without triggering panic too soon. You swallow. You're standing in the most ancient preschool of all time. And the teachers, they had talons. There's something tragic in that, isn't there? Something beautiful and cruel. The cycle of life refined into lessons so perfect that even stone remembers them. The predator didn't roar, it whispered. It didn't chase, it waited. And when it killed, it taught. Odd fact time: modern shrikes. Small, adorable songbirds are known to impale their prey on thorns or barbed wire and leave them as larders for later. But some researchers think these displays also act as training tools for juveniles, a kind of practical exam. So yeah, don't trust a cute animal with a sharp beak. You step to the far edge of the chamber where the ceiling dips low and the wall is deeply worn. A wide groove nearly shoulder height curves along the stone in a continuous line. Your hand fits inside it easily. You follow it with your fingers until it ends abruptly at a pile of small bones arranged in a rough spiral. No, not arranged. Placed. There's a point here buried in the sediment. A larger bone, possibly a humerus, wedged vertically like a stake. Around it, beetle shells, feathers, fragments of egg. You don't want to say the word, but it's in your head anyway. Altar. Historians still debate whether raptors had ritual behaviors. The evidence is thin. But sites like this make you wonder if you see the same arrangements in multiple caves. Same bone spirals? Same feather rings? Is it really a coincidence? Or was it a kind of culture? You rest your hand on the wall. It's warm again. That deep mineral warmth, like the cave's blood, still moves in slow pulses. You whisper, "What were you teaching?" "What?" And the silence whispers back, Maybe that patience is deadlier than speed. Maybe that silence is stronger than strength. Maybe that the best hunter is the one who doesn't have to chase. A new tunnel splits off from the chamber narrower than the rest. You drop to your hands and knees, crawling now. The walls close in. Your light flickers, catches, then steadies. And then you see them again, those symmetrical scratch marks running in perfect vertical pairs. It climbed this tunnel, or more likely it descended. You emerge into a chamber even darker than the rest. Not metaphorically, literally. Your light dims the moment you lift it. Not broken, just swallowed. The minerals in the stone here are different, black light eating, the kind of surface that refuses to give reflections. The floor is covered in tiny holes, dozens of them, inch-wide shallow, each one smoothed at the edges like something was nested in it. Or perhaps crouched for long periods. You crouch in one, it fits. The spacing suggests a group. You're sitting where a pack once rested. That's the implication. This species didn't just raise young, it operated in teams. Maybe not like wolves or lions, but coordinated enough to hunt cooperatively, raise broods, and maybe even mourn their dead. Yes, mourn. Because near the far end of the chamber, partially buried, is a full skeleton, a juvenile, but not prey, one of their own. Surrounding it feathers, placed deliberately, like a blanket, like a goodbye. You exhale. Suddenly, this predator doesn't seem quite so monstrous. It seems familiar. You sit beside the skeleton longer than you mean to. Not because you're tired, not because you're scared. Because something about the placement of those feathers, careful, purposeful, feels deeply human. And that's the problem, isn't it? You didn't come here expecting to feel kinship. You came expecting monsters. And yet, here lies a child cloaked in softness and death, no different than any small creature lost too soon. You whisper, "Did they miss you?" And it echoes not as sound but as a thought you can't unthink. Because if this predator mourned its dead even a little, then the walls around you aren't just the remains of a hunting ground. They're a kind of memory. You rise slowly, brushing the dust from your knees. You're not entirely sure how much deeper the cave goes, but the air is different now. Drier. The kind of air that clings to old paper. The light from your torch dims again, not from battery, but from dust. So much of it, coating everything like ash. But it's not ash, it's chitin. Beetles everywhere. You pause, waving your light across the floor. Thousands of carapaces crunch beneath your boots. And now you hear it. That faint, almost imperceptible rustle, like sandpaper in the dark. They're alive. Tiny wingless insects, blind, glistening, shaped like polished beans, scatter from your steps. They crawl into holes, under fossils, into old claw gouges. They're not afraid of you, because they've evolved here too. That's your odd fact of the night. Some beetle species in modern lava tubes have no eyes at all. Instead, they've developed hair-like sensors that detect vibrations and airflow. They can feel you before you ever arrive. You watch one beetle skitter along the spine of a half-buried raptor fossil. It pauses at the vertebrae, then disappears inside a cavity, probably where a lung once expanded. Life-filling death, like it always does. The floor ahead is cluttered with broken bones, but the pattern's off. They're not scattered. They're stacked, neatly, spine over spine, skull to skull, layered in gentle curves that suggest purpose. Some scientists insist it's natural sorting by water or collapse. But if you've ever seen a crow's stash pile or a fox's hoard, you know otherwise. There's a reason for this. Maybe practical, maybe symbolic. Historians still debate whether ancient predators like this had any symbolic thought. Did they understand death? Did they care? Or did they simply act on instinct that happened to look like intention? But intention or not, the pattern's here, and so are you. You kneel next to the nearest stack and find something stranger, still a rock. No carvings, no symbols, just unusually smooth and warm to the touch. It sits at the base of the pile like an anchor. You pick it up. It's heavy, but not impossibly so. It fits perfectly in your hand. And when you turn it over, you see faint scratches. Not raptor claws this time. Lines, repeated, parallel. Like something used this rock to rub down its talons, or maybe, just maybe, to mark something. Could this be the closest thing to a tool? Your torch flickers again, and this time you're nervous. Not because of the dark, because of what the dark reveals. You follow another tunnel. Narrower still. You're ducking now, the ceiling a breath above your scalp. But the floor is clean, almost unnaturally so. No bones, no beetles, no feathers, just dust. You think it's a dead end until your light catches something glinting at the back. A row of stones arranged in a line. Not random, deliberate, flat, rounded, all about the same size. Like stepping stones, except they don't go anywhere, just sit there, waiting. You crouch to examine them and notice the cave floor has a slight depression here, barely perceptible. You run your hand along it. It's worn smooth. Hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny feet move through here. Over and over. Not in chaos, in routine. This was a path. And now, with your light adjusted just right, you see the faintest markings beside the stones. Not claw scratches, tail swipes. Narrow, rhythmic. Left, right, like something dragging its tail as it walked the line. Not carelessly. Practicing. Balance. You step onto one of the stones. It shifts under your weight, not because it's loose, but because you're not meant to be here. Your center of gravity is wrong. Your limbs too long, your arms too short. You're not built for this path, but something was. This wasn't a kill site. It was a training route, a straightaway for young raptors to practice stealth. Foot placement. Centering their bodies. Learning not to trip, not to clatter. To walk the line in silence. You feel your throat tighten because it's beautiful. And that's not something you expected to feel down here. But it is. This creature, this feathered hunter of shadows, didn't just survive. It rehearsed, it remembered, and it taught, even in darkness, even underground. You sit on the last of the balance stones longer than you should, knees pulled to your chest, torchlight, casting strange shadows across the stone. There's something comforting about the stillness here, not empty but full, like being inside the mind of something ancient but not gone. A place built not with hands but with instincts so precise they leave no wasted step. You stand. Your legs protest, your spine cracks softly, but ahead the path changes again. The cave descends not steeply, but with a sense of commitment. You step forward, boots brushing a finer, sandier grit now. The sediment is lighter here, pale gray and dappled with tiny sparkles. Not mineral deposits, shell fragments. Small, circular, flattened things that crunch just a little too satisfyingly underfoot. You're in another feeding zone, but this one's different. The prey here wasn't caught by accident. You realize that as soon as your beam hits the first ring. Yes, a ring. A perfect circle of shell shards and bones, about 2 meters across, surrounded by scratch marks in an outward bloom. At its center, a slight depression, and a stone turned upright like a marker. You look closer. The central depression is stained, not just with decay, with color. Faint reddish brown. Organic. Impossible to date without lab equipment, but your gut knows it's old. Really old. You reach down, brush the dust aside, and find more of those tail swipes, tight and rhythmic. Like something circling again and again, slowly, patiently. You don't want to say it aloud, but the word forms anyway. Ritual. Historians still debate whether non-avian dinosaurs displayed anything resembling ritual behavior. But you're not talking about bonfires and singing. You're talking about repetition, a place returned to again and again. Motions repeated not for utility but for meaning. And this place, it's been used, worn. You back away slowly, suddenly self-conscious, like you've walked into someone else's room without knocking. The next chamber opens wide, wider than any yet. And here the bones lie thick, not scattered, not arranged, just present. Dozens of skeletons, some broken, some whole, and not all prey. You crouch beside one and realize with a jolt it's a raptor. Not fossilized, not fully, recent. Relatively. Its bones are brittle but not mineralized. Its feathers have vanished, but You see the impressions along the rib cage where muscles once clung tight to bone. The skull is cracked at the temple, but otherwise intact. You scan the floor and count 4 more like it, all adult-sized, all collapsed in different poses. None of them look violent, not torn apart, not dragged, just laid down. You feel your chest tighten again. Did they come here to die, or did something else bring them? You find no signs of struggle, no broken claws, no shattered snouts. It's like they simply stopped. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a resting place. Some paleontologists argue that certain ancient species exhibited behaviors similar to elephant graveyards, a term that's more myth than science, but the idea persists. Creatures returning to the same location to die. Not by choice necessarily, but by some deep instinct. A magnetic pull towards stillness. You scan the ceiling. Stalactites glisten above like frozen time. One has a feather stuck to it recent, or perhaps just lucky in its preservation. You wonder how many generations of this species moved through this place. Lived, hunted, practiced, and finally lay down here. Another odd fact, vultures in the Himalayas have been observed bringing their dead to specific ledges. Not for feeding, not for nesting, just depositing. Scientists don't agree on why. Some call it convenience. Others say it's a kind of unacknowledged reverence. You believe the latter now, because as you move among the bodies, your light catches something unexpected. A wall, flat, unnaturally smooth. You approach, and then you see them again. Marks, not random. Symbols, rough, scratched, some shallow, some deep, all placed vertically in a pattern. You don't know what they mean. No one does. But they aren't claw-sharpening streaks. They're vertical lines, some curved, some forked, some spiraled. Your breath catches as you follow one series downward, a three-line motif with a hook and a notch, repeated 4 times. It doesn't look like art. It looks like a name. Historians still debate whether non-human animals have a sense of individual identity beyond territory or hierarchy. But dolphins have signature whistles. Elephants respond to vocal names. Parrots can call each other uniquely. So is it really a stretch to imagine this, that a predator with feathers who hunted in coordinated groups, who raised its young underground, who trained its body and honored its dead, might have called itself something? You place your palm gently on the symbol. The stone is warm, and not because of temperature, because you've witnessed something. This isn't just a fossil site, it's a story. And the next part, you suspect it's the end. You leave the grave chamber with something tight in your throat, like you've said goodbye to someone you didn't know you were missing. The tunnel narrows again. These paths always seem to get smaller right before they reveal something big. You duck lower brush past stone that now seems friendlier somehow, like a library shelf nudging you toward the next chapter. The walls here pulse with silence. That kind of heavy velvet hush that muffles your own footsteps. It's like stepping into a museum where no one has ever breathed. And then, without warning, the tunnel opens. A chamber. Enormous. Natural cathedral, enormous. Your torch beam doesn't even touch the far wall. The floor before you dips slightly dusted in fine sediment. No bones, no feathers, just blank stone, empty in a way that feels deliberate. You edge forward, careful not to disturb what you can't yet see. Then your light catches the edges of the ceiling. Paint. You freeze. Not pigment, not handprints, not human. But it's there. Faint, patchy, applied with something broad and ragged. A wing. A tail, feathers dipped in ochre or clay. Whatever made these smears didn't use brushes. It used itself. Historians still debate whether non-human species left markings like this. Many believe cave art is uniquely human. But what you're seeing here, arcs, loops, tail-width lines that repeat with near symmetry, this isn't chaos. This is movement recorded. Imagine a raptor here, sweeping its body across the ceiling, leaving its path behind like a signature. Not to tell a story the way humans do, but to remember something. Maybe to teach, maybe just to exist. Odd fact, pigeons can recognize themselves in mirrors under certain conditions. So can magpies. So can manta rays. We are learning slowly and with resistance that more creatures are self-aware than we want to admit. So ask yourself, if something knows it's alive and knows it will one day die, what else might it want to leave behind? You step farther into the chamber and find the ring, a wide stone circle raised slightly at the rim, perfectly level. In the center, not bones, not feathers, but claws. Dozens, arranged radially like spokes in a wheel. Some belong to adults, some to juveniles. None of them attached to anything, just claws, filed down, placed carefully, their tips all pointing inward as if waiting for something in the middle that never arrived. You step closer. The floor between the claws is marked by concentric ovals, like something heavy circled again and again, wearing a spiral into stone. At first you think of ritual, then you think of pacing, then you think of waiting. Something waited here, and the claws, they weren't trophies. They were offerings. There's a theory, one of those whispered career-ruining ones, that ancient predators experienced something akin to mourning, not just for others but for themselves. That as death approached, they returned to specific places. Not to die, but to be remembered. You crouch and brush the center of the spiral. It's warm. No reason it should be, but it is. The ground under your fingers hums with silence, like something deep beneath the chamber is still breathing. Or dreaming. You want to say something, a thank you, an apology, a wish, but words don't feel appropriate here. They're too clumsy, too loud. So instead, you listen, and somewhere far behind your ears you imagine it. Not as a monster, not as a relic, but as a teacher. Not of language or fire or tools, but of silence, of presence, of listening so hard the world has no choice but to speak back. You rise slowly and take one last look at the circle. It doesn't explain itself, but it doesn't have to, because somehow you understand, and that's what it always wanted. You leave the spiral, slowly turning only once to glance back at the claws. They don't gleam, they don't whisper, but they watch, not with eyes, but with that quiet certainty of something that's already been through every ending you're still afraid of. And now as you follow the tunnel leading out, you're not sure whether you're being guided or dismissed. The passage slopes upward, subtly at first, then with more certainty. You feel it in your calves, in your breath. The stone is cooler here, drier. The kind of dryness that comes with time, not air. And the walls begin to change. No more claw marks, no more prints, no more feather imprints or scraped rituals, just stone, blank. But too blank. You reach out, brush your fingers along the wall and feel it instantly. Worn smooth. Not by erosion, not by water, by passage. This tunnel was used more than any other. You shine your light ahead and see it wider, straighter. There's a slope to the floor that feels engineered, though nature doesn't build ramps for your comfort. You're walking the highway now, the main artery of this species' world, and it's deserted. Almost. Halfway up on the left-hand side, your light catches an odd glint. Not metal, nothing so modern. Just a shape that's wrong for this space. Angular, jagged. You crouch beside it and blink. It's a tooth. Long, serrated, with a curve that looks surgical. You hold it up, it doesn't belong to a mammal, or a bat, or even the feathered raptor you've come to know. This is from something bigger, heavier, a different predator. You turn slowly, suddenly aware of just how much you've assumed the raptors were the apex of this place. But maybe not. Maybe they were the artists, the scholars, the caretakers, but someone else was king. You scan the walls again and realize some of those old gouges, the deep diagonal ones, too wide for raptor claws. You didn't recognize them before because they weren't part of the same vocabulary. This chamber was scarred by something else. Historians still debate whether this cave system was ever shared by multiple species. Some say yes. Others argue that no two large predators could share such tight quarters without bloodshed. But the fossil evidence doesn't lie. Claw patterns overlap. Some bite marks on raptor skeletons match no known anatomy from that species. So maybe they had an enemy. A competitor, a shadow to their silence. You feel your pulse throb in your wrist as you move forward. Now your eyes scan not just for fossils, but for signs of conflict. And you find them. Scattered bones, crushed feathers, teeth small ones curved defensive. Not raptor, not prey. Infant remains. Whatever attacked didn't hunt, it invaded. And the tunnel narrows again. But not before you see the most haunting thing of all, a clawed handprint, 5 digits, not 3, pressed into soft sediment half preserved in a corner of the wall. The fingers are long, too long, but not reptilian, not avian, something else. You remember an old theory almost folkloric about a genus of large theropod whose skeletal record is scattered and suspicious. Known only from teeth and foot bones, no complete skeleton ever found. Some say they hunted feathered dinosaurs. Others say they scavenged. All agree they left a path of terror wherever they moved. You hope it wasn't that. You really, really hope. But the tunnel narrows into a final chamber and what you see silences every other fear. Because here lies the last of them, a full adult raptor skeleton. Perfectly preserved, curled in on itself like a sleeping fox. No wounds, no panic, just rest. And next to it, something absurd. A pebble, smooth, perfectly round, almost pretty. It's been placed beside the skull, deliberate, like a charm. Or a token. Or a memory. Odd fact crows have been documented placing small objects next to dead companions. Beads, buttons, bits of bright foil. No one knows why. Maybe the raptors did too. You kneel and touch the pebble. It's cold, but it feels like closure. This raptor didn't die in battle, didn't get hunted. It laid down, as though it knew, as though it chose, and in doing so, it gave the cave its last word. You look around. No more scratches, no more spirals, no prey bones, just stone smooth and still. Like even the cave has decided it's time to rest. You don't speak as you back away. You just nod. Because silence is the only thing that feels right. The climb out begins without fanfare. No final challenge, no lurking threat. Just stone beneath your boots curving gently upward. The tunnel narrows once more, as if squeezing you through the last pinch of the past. Behind you, the cave sleeps. You stop once halfway up and look back. There's nothing there. Not even your footprints. The dust has already begun reclaiming what you thought you'd left. The cave's memory is selective. Generous to some, stingy to others. You exhale through your nose quietly and keep climbing. Light begins to bleed in ahead. Faint bluish. Cold, but real. After so much artificial glow, it hits your eyes like water. You emerge into a natural porch of stone, an outcropping just outside the cave mouth. The air smells of snow even if there's none around. Pine needles and rock dust ride the breeze. You've returned to the surface, but the cave has changed you. You sit on a flat stone, letting your legs dangle over the edge. Far below, the valley stretches out in folds of green and gray. Mist clings to the ridges like something trying to remember the sky, and it hits you all at once. Those raptors weren't legends. They weren't monsters. They weren't just fossils pinned under glass. They were present. They moved in families. They trained. They buried their dead. They built shrines, schools, routes of passage. They used feathers not to fly, but to feel, to speak, to listen. And in that silence, they became something more than animal. Something just close enough to us to make you uncomfortable. Historians still debate whether the intelligence of these feathered predators rivaled that of modern corvids, crows, ravens, magpies. But if your time in that cave proved anything, it's that intelligence is not always about tools or words or inventions. Sometimes it's about repetition, deliberate movement, a claw scraping the same circle in the same spot for 20 years. A chick watching its mother wait in perfect stillness and understanding why. You think about your own species, how you light fires, build screens, fill silence with noise. And down there in the rock and hush, a creature lived its whole life in a world without fire, without sky, without even language. And still it thrived. Still it remembered. Still it taught. You reach into your pack and pull out a feather you picked up near the entrance hours ago. Or was it days? You press it between the pages of your notebook gently, like laying a flower at someone's grave. There's one more odd fact to add to the pile. Recent research suggests some species of feathered dinosaurs had air sacs in their bones, making them lighter, more efficient, quiet. Their bodies were designed to make the most out of stillness, to move like wind. And when you sat in their school, their graveyard, their hall of names, you didn't just feel like a visitor. You felt like a student of patience, of silence, of attention. You let the breeze ruffle your hair. Somewhere a bird calls, not a raptor, not anymore, but something feathered, something bright, something alive. And you wonder how much of that ancient quiet still echoes in the wings of every bird overhead. How much of that hush has survived? You descend into the valley slowly, like someone waking from a dream. The trail is uneven, and the roots reach out like fingers, but your legs move on their own. The cave still clings to you, not in a haunted way, but like moss on skin after a swim. Quiet, soft, familiar. You stop once at a bend in the trail, not because you're tired, but because you feel watched. Not by people, not even by animals, but by memory. The kind of watching that happens when you step into a space that remembers more than it forgets. You sit again on a log damp with shade and take out your notebook. You flip to the page with the feather, press your palm against it lightly, and the sound returns. Not a roar, not even a breath, a click. Dry, deliberate, not from the cave this time, but from you. You realize your fingers have begun tapping the log. 3 beats, a pause. A fourth, almost like scratching, almost like calling something back. You stop and smile just a little. Maybe that's the last lesson. The raptor didn't make noise for dominance. It didn't thunder through the jungle. It clicked, scratched, echoed small sounds full of meaning, measured, tactile. Even now, some birds like mannequins use their feathers to sing silently, not with voice, but with movement. Vibration. Air flicked through wingtips like reeds. Sound, it turns out, doesn't always need a throat. Sometimes it only needs intention. You continue your walk through the trees. The sunlight dapples the forest floor, and for the first time in hours, you're bathed in color again. Green moss, yellow fern fronds, brown bark flaking off like forgotten paint. But nothing feels as vivid as the blackness behind you. The cave still curled it into the earth like a sleeping animal. And something deep in you begins to understand why the raptor chose to hunt in darkness. Not because it couldn't handle the light, but because it didn't need it. Light reveals everything. Darkness forces you to listen, to feel, to know. You remember that room of training stones, the soft path worn into the rock by feet too careful to stumble, and how even now, millions of years later, you can still feel the echo of it in your calves. We often assume evolution favors loudness, aggression, speed, but sometimes it chooses precision, stillness, timing, a claw that lands exactly once and perfectly. Historians still debate whether this species went extinct from climate change, predation, or collapse of their cave ecosystems. Theories abound, but none of them feel big enough to match the quiet legacy they left behind. You find a clearing, the same one you passed before entering the cave, now transformed by perspective. You sit again. The air smells different now, less wild, more clean. You take out your notebook, not to write, just to look. The feather between the pages shimmers faintly in the sun. A small line of fluff and keratin, delicate, but it lasted, even through millions of years of collapse and silence and stone. Even after its owner had curled in death, even after the cave was sealed and forgotten. That's the strange comfort, isn't it? That fragility and endurance might be the same thing. That a feather dropped in the dark could one day teach a stranger how to move more quietly through the world. Odd fact, there's evidence that humans early on imitated the animals they feared most, not in aggression, but in mimicry. Moving like leopards, watching like hawks, listening like wolves. Maybe the raptor taught us too. Not directly, but deeply. You feel it again, that silence. The one that doesn't demand, doesn't explain, just is. And for once, you don't try to fill it. You let it sit with you, like an old friend, like a shadow with feathers. The sun has lowered by the time you reach the edge of the tree line. You can see your car now, parked like a punctuation mark against the long sentence of the forest. The world looks normal again, gray road, distant bird song, the occasional whir of wind brushing the branches. No fossils, no feathers, just the 21st century stretching out like nothing ever happened. But something did. You don't speak it aloud, not because you're afraid to, but because it feels wrong to give that cave's silence a name it didn't choose. Instead, you stand quietly and look back. The cave mouth is barely visible from here, a dark dent in the landscape. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking, and even then you might think it just a trick of shadow, which is in a way exactly what it is. A memory in the shape of stone. You step toward the car but pause with your hand on the door. There's one thing left. You pull your notebook out again. The feather inside still rests there, pressed neatly between the pages. You pluck it out and look around. There's a sapling by the trail, maybe 5 years old. Thin, delicate, doing its best. You walk over, crouch, and tuck the feather into the fork of its branches, not to leave it behind, but to add to something. A gift, a record, a kind of whispered thank you, soft and private. You straighten. No one sees. But if someone ever does, they'll find a single ancient feather clinging to a growing tree and wonder what it meant. Maybe they'll smile. Maybe they'll listen closer. You drive home in silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because silence now feels fuller than it used to. You carry it with you, the echo of padded feet, the scent of stone warmed by bodies long gone, the shape of a tail brushing dust in perfect rhythm, the hush of claws balancing on smooth rock. Back at home, you open a window and sit on your floor. The night air is warm. The fan hums gently in the corner. You close your eyes, and for a moment you imagine it, feathers brushing ceiling stone, claws poised in perfect stillness, a child raptor watching its mother wait, the sound of a world that hunted without fire and remembered without words. In the stillness of a forgotten cave, you encountered the feathered raptor that hunted not in sunlight, but in pitch-black silence. You traced its life from the scraped marks at the cave entrance to the nursery dens where its young were raised. This predator didn't roar. It clicked, listened, and learned. It stalked not with speed but with patience. Its feathers weren't for flight but for stillness. You followed the paths worn by generations of clawed feet through feeding grounds, training pits, and chambers that might have been schools or shrines or both. You witnessed the evidence of mourning feathers laid beside the dead stones arranged in patterns too intentional to be chance. You realized that these raptors weren't just killers. They were caretakers, communicators, teachers, and in their silence, they left behind something louder than any fossil. A memory, a lesson. That survival can be soft. That precision can outlast violence. That a whisper, when repeated over millennia, becomes an echo etched in stone. You left a feather in the branches of a tree and returned to a world that doesn't always listen but might if reminded. The raptor story is done, but its silence walks beside you now, light as down, sharp as claw. A presence that hunted in darkness and taught you how to see.